Hey, peace, everyone. Welcome to another episode of We Charge Colonialism Podcast and Book Club. Hold on, I don't like this lay. How did we get here?
I don't even know like how it look like. It's
I don't know.
Hold on, I want to change that. How did we do this? All right, I'll figure it out in a second. But because I like the usual lay. But welcome everybody to another episode of We Charge Colonialism Podcast and Book Club. I am Ikemba, head writer and researcher at We Charge Colonialism. Y'all can introduce yourself.
Go ahead, Natasha.
Oh, I was gonna let you go, Frank, because you were the second in line.
No,
But-
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Natasha, and I am a co-host here and a educator.
Hello, everyone. This is Frank, host for the Revolutionary Repatriation Educational Lecture Series, the VCC.
All right, and we are your team this morning. Again, thank you everybody for joining us, especially those who continue to join us every week and be a part of these discussions. We Charge Colonialism is a grassroots think tank out here. Part of our mission and objective is to get Africans to really, or the world all over, to recognize African people as a colonized people in the United States and over the world, how Africans are suffering from colonial conditions. With that being said, that the job of We Charge Colonialism is really like a process of just trying to decolonize the minds of African people. And it makes the work of organizing for revolution, for change in our communities a lot easier once people become conscious of the conditions that we're in. I think the continued engagement and actually work that we do that's against the interests of the African Revolution continues to take place just out of people not understanding the relationship, the colonial relationship, Africans not understanding that. And those who, those Africans who are in positions of power sort of have this reluctancy to go against a system that they know is unjust, especially as it pertains to African people. And actually, like Natasha, I think I want to start with your story because it kind of speaks to that with Eric Adams, an African who's over the city of New York. So, with that being said, I'm also going to go try to change our lay back to the red, black, and green. Figure that out. I don't know what happened, but we'll start off with our weekly roundup, and then in the second half, we'll go back to our book, Pan-Africanism, a History. And you should have, there's a link to the book in the description for those people who want to read along with this. You can look in the description. And in the second half, we'll start with the book reading. So, Natasha, you want to set it off? We're going to start off with our weekly roundup. You're on mute, Natasha.
The current event that I want to discuss today is this article that came out in Bloomberg. And the title of the article is Arrest for Low-Level Crimes Climb Under New York Mayor Eric Adams. And I'm just going to read just a couple of key things from here before I give my analysis. So this is the first quote. It says, I will both support, this is from Eric Adams, I will both support our police officers who will help make our city safe again and hold zero tolerance for those who violate that sacred obligations because both public safety and justice are prerequisites to prosperity, said Adams, who was a New York City police officer for more than 2 decades. That's why we are working every day to dam the many rivers that feed the sea of violence. And I'll get back to that. Another key thing from this article is this talks about targeting minor offenses. Misdemeanors are typically characterized as low-level offenses that carry a maximum penalty of 1 year of incarceration and or fines. They account for the bulk of the cases in the criminal legal system in New York City and elsewhere. 9% of the detainees at the city's troubled Rikers Island jail complex are there on misdemeanor charges, according to city data. And this talks about also the fact that a memo that was sent out in March outlined how the police needed to prioritize low-level infractions, and this focus on offenses like public drinking, public urination, dice games, and other crimes that the department says lead to disorder. And criminal reform advocates point to the memo as a sign of the return to the so-called broken windows policy, a theory that argues small crimes and disorder lead to more serious crimes, which was part of the reason why they had that whole stop and frisk in New York that got overturned and ruled as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So it shows that the same things that weren't working before, he's basically doing the same thing under another name. And the low-level assaults and the misdemeanors that have gone up by like 25%. Nearly 51% of the misdemeanors and nearly 90% of those arrested were people of color. So we know that 90% of the people who are being arrested in this let's target low-level crime stuff, things as such, as petty as jumping the turnstile to get on the train. And so he talks about how basically this article is talking about how this is him targeting this is the highest jump in arrests for misdemeanors that they've seen in the last decade. So even under de Blasio, they weren't even doing that. And that whole stop and frisk thing that they were doing before, they had to stop. And so basically, like we were talking about before, when African people become agents of the state and they take the position that they're here to do what is best for the state, it ends up harming African people, and it doesn't work. And so what we're seeing is just a return of the same old law and order practices that have been used for the police to terrorize Black neighborhoods and Black people, because we know that we're going to be disproportionately affected by these types of policies. And specifically in this case, 90%, as it said, 90% of those who have been arrested are Black. And the article even goes on to say that arresting people for crimes of poverty can exacerbate the problems they face in the first place by forcing them to serve jail time or pay fines. Focusing on the root causes of the crime by improving food security, housing, and creating better public and mental health insurances would have a greater impact on crime. And it says the city is not choosing to invest in what works, but instead investing in the mass incarceration machine that has been growing for decades. Reducing reliance on incarceration does not equal evisceration of accountability. We want to make sure we're not destabilizing the people's lives in the ways that leads to less public safety. So his whole idea of these small crimes leading to prosperity just doesn't even make any sense. As it said here, making sure that people have food security, housing security, which we know is a big issue in Brooklyn, and other parts of New York where gentrification, which is really ethnic cleansing, is high. Those things are not really being addressed, but instead what he's doing is using his power and his force to really arrest more Black people for really minor incidents and things that they should not be arrested for. So that's kind of like my analysis.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing this story. When I would bring the story up, when I was reading the story as well, the 90%, stuck out. I already, of course, already had the assumption that we were going to be the bulk of those who are victimized by this, I guess, new age, this a reinvention of the broken windows policy, right? That who was the guy? Rudy Giuliani, his policies. And so you know, when I was reading this story, when I seen the 90%, I didn't think it was going to be that high. I knew it was going to be high, but you know, 90%, 9 out of 10 people of color, because that's the term that was used in the paper. But Europeans are not the victims. You know, they're a small percentage of the victims of this policy. And so Eric Adams is talking about, or at least his story is that he was brutalized by the police when he was 15 or something like that. Like he went trying to identify with Africans, but at the same time, you are identified with Africans and talking as if he understands the plight of African people being under this system. But at the same time, he's supporting these policies that are overwhelmingly against the interests of the life of African people. So, you know, and this is an African who is mayor, and this is someone who was a former police officer. So, you know, when you think about it, you have these Africans who understand, you know, I believe they understand that the system is, you know, a system that has historically worked against African people. But I believe that they just have accepted that in order for us to advance, for people to advance, that some others have to be stepped on. I mean, what other reason would he accept a policy, or would he back a policy like this, knowing the impact that it's going to have on African people? And he's just an example of many Africans who are in positions of power, whether they're Africans in the Americas or the continent or wherever, who are in positions of power and continue to go along with the system, despite it overwhelmingly causes genocide, death, incarceration, misery to African people. So the last point I want to make is that, you know, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, you know, I used to hear him say that the laws are the opinions of the ruling class. And so that's something that we have to like really be mindful and conscious of in regards to these laws. Like, they're not put in place to serve justice to the colonized or the oppressed. And so Malcolm X, you know, once said that he said, don't fight on the ground under the ground rules, or don't struggle within the ground rules of the one that you are struggling against. Like, that's insane. And so we find ourselves, when it comes to the laws of the ruling class, like, you know, Huey P. Newton talks about this, all revolutionaries talk about this, like these what does the law of the oppressor mean to the subjugated? And that's something that we have to really be conscious of. So you know, Frank, go ahead. I know I went on. Okay.
Just to add up to what you guys said, you know, it just how to call it, reinforced to us that for each time we see a black person in whether an elected or an appointed position, we should not get it how to call it, twisted that, oh, because that person is a black person means that that person going to work to protect African people. Is not most of the time it's not going to be in the case. The same way the statistic says that you know, 9 out of 10, you know, African are incarcerated, you know, wrongfully or something that is not supposed to be. It is the same way 9 out of 10 of black person in office, whether elected or appointed position, will not and is not, or they are not going to be in our favor, which is a fact. And the reality here is those policies that are being created mostly only work in black community. They only work in African people, and you know, where African people live. There where those policies take effect. And they make those policies based on the conditions we find ourselves in, our circumstances that we find ourselves in. They are not there to work with African people or to work with black people for black people to rise up from the condition that they are in or we are in. Because the fact here is, it is because of our condition that the prison system is making money. So why would they want us to leave that condition? So rather, if they see us maybe rising up from one occasion, that the sees to is that it's going to take money from their pocket, because that's how the capitalist society operates. They look at the other side. Okay, if they are rising on the other side, we have another area that we can still catch them, to imprison them and to make them look bad. And this is what exactly they do. So they are saying that African people are united, right? Even though we are in different organizations, but we are getting to realize that this is not about individual organization. It's about a particular group of people. Just how other people are united and working against us, this is how we need to unite and work. And as we do that, they go on the other side, use our same black folks in offices, because these black folks want to remain there to get the money. And then these are the same black folks in our community, in our neighborhood, will go on to bring out these racist and bad policies against us. And sometimes I don't blame people who do not even want to vote how they call it, on how they call it, state level, not federally, because most of the time people will say, vote on a state level, vote for representative or vote for Congress, or senators in your district and so forth, right? But these are the same people that are making a law or the policy within a district that I live in that is affecting me. So where is the trust to vote for a black man or a black person? Because at the end of the day, they are going to carry on the same policy that is affecting me. So these are some of the things, and I think things that we need to do as African within our community, depending on these racist policy, we just have to find a way within a revolutionary, how they call it, educational form as we are doing here. What can we do to avoid these policies? Because regardless what, these policies will come. They're going to run these policies and they're going to reserve these policies against us. So what can we do within our community so that these policies, will not get out to a situation that we will get in? Again, we just have to keep educating the public that, listen, they are passing on these policies, but this is what we need to do. I think we need to get out of the way and, run your community block, educate one another on what to do. Do not do this and so forth and things. Other than that, we live within a system, and that's what the system want to see.
Hey, appreciate that. The feedback. I wanted to, raise something that was put in the chat. Lyle Zu, namaste, family. Linda Amaniako. He says, how is it, or he or she says, how is it that the headline news focuses on problems facing African people? Why can't there be a shift towards information that shows us successfully charting our own destiny? I appreciate the comment. I think that, there has to be a balance. We do need to talk more about the building that is taking place within the African community, because it is being done. But I think, like, if we charge colonialism, even in the name itself, we're making an indictment on the system. And so how do we, make an indictment without having evidence and examples of how colonialism is impacting African people? And I think part of this process is raising the consciousness of African people, the awareness of the conditions that they're in, not being, not being a problem that's self-inflicted, not being an issue that Africans have brought upon themselves, but an external force that has come into the African community and set up these conditions or these institutions that has perpetuated the system of colonialism, slavery, and oppression. And so, I think, like, there definitely has to be a balance, though, in the discussion. But this is part of the reason why, we bring, certain stories, particularly the one we just talked about. But we can transition to the next story. Unless one of y'all has something y'all wanted to add.
I would just add that I do agree with you and the brother that, we want, a little bit more of a balance. And well, for me, I live in New York, and one of the things that I know that people are always like, okay, well, what do you think about Mayor Eric Adams? A lot of Black, and there was a lot of movement for Black people to vote for him. And so I think it's really important for us to know that, okay, this is the man that you voted for, as a Black person, because there's always that type of, like, Brother Frank was saying, there's always that type of, that push, Like, oh, this is a black guy, let's make sure we vote for him. And so, you know, as black people, if you do vote for him, you have to make sure you hold him accountable. You have to make sure that you're aware of what he's doing. And when he's doing these types of things, you know, we should come out as a black community and say, okay, we voted for you, but now this is what you're doing. You know, so like you were saying, you know, we have to be aware of what's going on, especially when people want you to vote for these specific people who are black. And then they turn around and do the same thing that the white person that was, you know, in that same position was doing before. That they make no changes, but they just ramp it up sometimes.
Indeed, I agree with that. People have to be aware of what's going on. Frank, you wanted to go into the next story?
All right, because of time, I won't put the article out, but I will just say it and then we can just go through it. So in Kenya, there are how they call it, citizens, or two tribes to be specific, or some tribe in Kenya that are trying to sue the British government for colonial abuse or abuses that was levied against them, in a sense that they forcefully took their land and they raped them, they tortured them, they humiliated them, and so forth and things. And then currently they even took their land from them, and then currently they have a tea farm and that they use in Great Britain there, but the farm is in Kenya. And then they harvest it, take it to Great Britain, and then make billions of dollars out of it. So, and then they don't, how they call it, provide a suitable life for the tribe that live in our area. So the tribe have come out to sue the British government for these abuses against them, because their land was forcefully taken from them. Up to now, the British still have it. So they did horrible things, you know, against human rights. But these are the same people again that will come out to the African community to speak about human rights, if to say they're the one that define human rights, or they're the one that know what human right is, that they're supposed to define for black people or for African people. So there's what's going on right now. And my hope here is that the African leaders in power, you serve people, and the people you serve, if they come out with a concern of what is hurting them for the nation to which you lead, I think you need to look into it. So don't just sit and look at the citizens and look at these tribes to say, okay, it is our business, let them go with it, because you feel that you have an attachment to a colonial how do you call it, leadership, or you have an attachment to a colonialist. I think you need to work with your people. You have an attachment to your people than any colonialist. You have an attachment to your country than the colonialists coming onto your country exploiting the land. You have an attachment, obligation to serve your people than to serve your colonial how do you call it, master aim on the African continent. So as your citizens are coming up with these concerns, you need to work with your citizens, because you are the one in power that can go to the so-called UN. You are the one in power to give these people the momentum, or the how do you call it, the verse that they need to speak to them. You are the one in power. So they expect you, when they bring out these concerns, to work with them, because at the end of the day, you're going to die tomorrow, and your offspring going to be alive, and they're going to stay on that particular land. So if you can't fight for them today, it means that you are now also fighting for the next generation to come. So we urge the Kenyan authority or leader to work with the people of this concern to hold the British government accountable.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this story up. And I try to be practical, and understand and realistic at the same time, and understand the difficulty that many of us have within this system of trying to make decisions that are going to impact, the people that we're supposed to be, guiding or leading and so forth. And so, in some of the decision making some of the decision making of African people, it is like sort of like weighing the good and the bad, but at the same time, though, not in all this, I'm not going. I know that's a general statement, because you have African leaders who are just straight up dictators and don't care. But I think that there's some genuine leaders out there who find themselves, because you see that in the United States as well, where we're based. Some genuine people who come into positions and find that the forces that are moving things is just too strong to overcome without the support of the people. That's why this movement has to come from the grassroots, because without the people really dictating the terms of these agreements, these puppets or these people who are in positions of leadership, they'll continue to go along with the go along, right? Go along just to get along, right? So the last point I want to make on this is that when it comes to the system that we're a part of, the international political economy is something that we have to sever our ties with. We have to sever our ties with Europe. We have to sever our ties with anyone that is upholding this system, including those African leaders. Because if the future, you talked about the future, Frank, if the 5-year, 10-year plan isn't doing that, then, and continuing to engage in this system, then what changes will really make in regards to the power relationship between African people and Europeans and others. I think it is very important that African people begin to understand that I mentioned the Malcolm X quote earlier, like we can't continue to struggle within the ground rules of Europeans. Everything that they do, everything that they set up, the structure itself is to perpetuate this relationship. And so we have to build alternatives, even while we're engaged in the system. Natasha, we were just kind of talking about that, how the system keeps us busy. But what are the escape plans? And I know you don't talk about that on YouTube or anywhere, but I'm just hoping that there are escape plans that are being made and by the leadership. But I don't think we're really seeing that. So with last point, it's just a lot to this. But what you were saying, Frank, like that's what the Kenyan people need to do. They have an escape plan, even though they're continuing to engage in this relationship? But go ahead, Natasha.
I just wanted to just add one specific thing, because thinking about this specific topic, it reminded me of what I was talking about last week when it came to the environmentalism, and I was giving the example actually of Kenya and the lands that were taken during colonialism that were never given back. And I believe where those tea farms are in the White Highlands. I believe that's what they called them. When the Europeans came in, they decided to call this area of Kenya the White Highlands. And that's where they planted a lot of, their teas and created these tea farms. And I think that we have to really start to, as the diaspora and those on the continent, push for land back, because you want these people to live, you're suing them so that, you can kind of live in a better neighborly way, or, in a way where they're not, oppressing you as much in terms of you're living in Kenya on your own land, and you have to live next to these tea farms. And the reason that, they're suing is because of the kind of conditions that they have to live under. But really, it should be a push for land back, because you shouldn't have to live near the land that you used to own. You should be able to go back to that land that you have. And Kenya has, I believe, the second or third largest slum in the world. So I think the first two ones are in the Middle East. And so it's a huge slum. And so knowing that exists in Kenya, there should be no reason why there should not be a push for land back. You cannot have such a big slum with millions and millions and millions and millions of people living in that area in the same country. And then you have a whole tea farm where they're just growing tea for people in Europe. I think that there needs to be a serious push for land back, and that we shouldn't have to try to figure out how to work with Europeans living on land that is not theirs, and that is really negatively affecting Black people. It can't be like, okay, we're going to treat you a little bit better in this area, but yet you still have all of these millions of people in a slum in that same country. So I think that, that's what, my my 2 cents for that.
I appreciate that. So right here, we're gonna make our transition. I think we had 2 stories that we, touched on, and hopefully, people got something out of our weekly roundup. We're going to transition into our book, Pan-Africanism, A History. There's a link in the description. I want to appreciate everybody for being on here, being a part of this discussion. Continue to like and share so we can get as many people to join us as possible and be a part of this dialogue. We're going to be reading from page 28, Garvey and Garveyism. Make sure, nobody criticizes us for jumping over the Garvey section. So we're starting on page 28, the first paragraph under Garvey and Garveyism. Garvey and Garveyism, the man who would become the most significant figure during the period of the First World War and after was the Jamaican journalist, writer, trade unionist, and activist Marcus Garvey, who first established the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, UNIA, in Jamaica. In 1914. It seems likely that Amy Ashwood, Garvey's first wife, may have been the UNIA's first member and secretary, but as the organization was launched before she met Garvey, claims for joint founding may not be appropriate. Second. Hold on, yeah. Give me 1 second.
You want one of us to jump in while you're?
Oh yeah, jump in. I'm gonna have to read it from a different document. You can finish that.
Okay. The early Jamaican UNIA was concerned with social and economic upliftment, and it soon adopted the famous motto, "One God, one aim, one destiny." Nevertheless, it declared itself to be non-political and claimed it wished to emulate Booker T. Washington and establish a Tuskegee in Jamaica. However, the UNIA manifesto included amongst its aims establishing a universal confederacy amongst the race, as well as promoting racial pride and love, developing education, commercial enterprises, and conscientious Christian Christian worship, as well as assisting in the civilizing of backward tribes in Africa. It was formed in view of the universal disunity existing among the people of the Negro or African race, and the apparent danger which must follow the continuance of such a spirit. Garvey explained that wherever he had traveled, quote, "I saw the injustice done to the race because it was black." He had then been inspired by Booker T. Washington's autobiography, Up from Slavery. And whilst he was in London, immediately before returning to Jamaica in 1914, his doom of being a race, quote, "his doom of being a race leader dawned on him." According to his own account, quote, "I asked, where is the black man's government? Where is his king and his kingdom? Where is his president, his country, and his ambassador, his army, his navy, his men of big affairs? I could not find them, and then I declared, I will help to make them."
All right. Appreciate that. So yeah, let's go on a little before we go into that. Garvey's approach was influenced not only by his initial admiration for Booker T. Washington and his sojourn in Britain and Central America, but also by his upbringing in Jamaica, where the 1865 Morant Bay Rebellion and demands for self-government were still a living memory. Garvey was also influenced by J. Robert Love, publisher of The Advocate, a Jamaican newspaper, which, like others in the Caribbean and African colonies, as well as elsewhere, championed a Pan-African approach and was concerned about the destiny of the Negro race. in Africa for the Africans. Love publicized the 1900 Pan-African Conference and worked with Sylvester Williams when he visited Jamaica to organize a branch of the Pan-African Association. By the time he had reached London in 1913, Garvey was adamant that those from the Caribbean, rather than those from the United States, would be the instruments of uniting a scattered race who, before the close of many centuries, will found an empire on which the sun shall shine as ceaselessly as it shines on the empire of the North today. However, as has been pointed out, Pan-African influences on Garvey would have been manyfold and certainly included Blyden, Horton, and Casely Hayford, as well as many others. It cannot be proven that Garvey was influenced by Chief Sam's African movement, but certainly established an important precedent for Garvey's Black Star Line and plans for African repatriation, as was remarked by the media and authorities at the time. Chief Alfred Sam was a trader from the Gold Coast with a company registered in New York who was concerned to develop trade links between West Africa and the United States. In 1913, Sam secured rights to land in West Africa and brought a ship with the aim of encouraging the immigration of the best Negro farmers and mechanics from the United States to different sections in West Africa. Sam's trade and immigration schemes were referred to as an African movement concerned with men and women of African blood, and he also proposed to create an Ethiopia steamship line. Sam's repatriation plans were enthusiastically received by prominent African Americans in Oklahoma, and soon several hundred had been persuaded to financially commit to the scheme, much to the concern of the government of the United States and British colonial authorities. Eventually, about 60 African Americans made the trip to West Africa, and the venture faced many difficulties and official opposition. What it does show is that some African Americans were willing to face the uncertainty of life in Africa rather than continue to live in the United States, that dreams of repatriation endured, and that Sam, as well as Garvey, managed to tap into these Pan-African dreams. Chief Sam's plans had a vociferous champion, the Reverend Orishatuke Faduma, a Sierra Leonean member of the American Negro Academy and the AMB Church, who joined the voyage and wrote a series of articles defending the African movement. Although Dusé Muhammad Ali was a strong critic, it is quite possible that Marcus Garvey learned from the African movement and was inspired by it. So we're at the top of page 30 now, but just to touch on some things that was brought up, Garvey. It was brought up in this particular section that Garvey was influenced by Booker T. Washington, and many people who are familiar with Marcus Garvey, that history of the UNIA, knows the influence that Booker T. Washington had. And as a matter of fact, Marcus Garvey would come to the United States or had planned to come to the United States to meet Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington had transitioned in 1915. So when Marcus Garvey got here and got to the States in 1916, Booker T. Washington had already transitioned. But Garvey would stay and he would organize the UNIA in New York City and would go across the country and begin to organize Africans in the Americas and set up branches throughout the United States. With that being said, though, just thinking about they spoke about the early part of Booker T. Washington's program where it wasn't really political. It was more so, it seemed more like Booker T. Washington's plan with a focus on developing economic institutions. It was still a self-interested program though, but it was dealing more so with how do we control our economy. But you can't really separate economics from politics anyway. So I think it was quite natural for it to develop into what it became. So I wonder if y'all had any thoughts. There were some other things, but I'll wait to see what y'all had to say.
You wanna go in, or you want me to come?
You can go, Frank.
I want me to continue.
All right. So, yeah. some of the thing I got from this chapter reading about Garvey is that his fight and his movement, it was not just about fighting abroad. So he was very calculative. He knew that and I would say this is where in this contemporary how they call it pan-African view, I think most of us are also getting it wrong. You cannot fight, looking at Michael Garvey philosopher, you cannot be fighting a system that is both in the diaspora and at the same time on the African continent. That was Michael Garvey philosopher. So while he was fighting a system in the so-called free land, he was also fighting a system in Africa. So how did he do that? What he did was to educate African people in a so-called free war, and then before departing to the African continent. So while he was doing that, he was creating disciples that if you go on the African continent, this is what you are going to do. And the colonizer, because they studied us, they saw it quickly that we need to act. Because how can a man without no radio station, without no technology or so forth, but was able to organize mass African in the white man land, in the eyes, in the face of the white man? So how about on the African continent, where you're going to see black people all over? If you go to the next era, you're going to see black men, the next era, black men, the next era, black men. It's going to be very easy. And he's also training people here who will go to the African continent and will become easy to blend in, because these people will now go with a colonial mindset. Like how we have black people these days serving prestigious position, but with a colonial mindset and not fighting for their people. Michael Garvey saw that as a threat state, because he knew that if he fight here and he don't fight the people in Africa and he migrate back to Africa, it's still going to be the same. So he do not want to fight here and then go back to start all over. So as he's fighting, he is succeeding. At the same time, he should be succeeding in Africa. So what he was doing was, he was not just fighting for political independence or political freedom. He was also fighting for economic freedom. And he was also fighting for social freedom. And that was different from how these days advocates carry on their advocacy.
And so I'll just point out one thing that stuck out to me specifically in this area of the reading, when it talked about, and I'll just reread this real section really quickly, how the UNIA manifesto included establishing a confederacy amongst the race, promoting racial pride, developing education, commercial enterprises, and conscientious Christian worship, as well as assisting the civilizing of backward tribes in Africa. So two things that stuck out to me about this was one, that it seemed to be holistic, right? It talked about wanting to establish a confederacy, but then also dealing with the education piece, and then dealing with the economic piece in terms of enterprises. And also when he talked about conscientious Christian worship, I mean, to me, that's the spiritual aspect. And I think that when we're looking at things that we've done back in the day, and also like, what are we doing today? And also learning from, our ancestors and what they were doing, is the importance of having everything included, that we don't have to fight and say, okay, well, no, it's this thing. No, we have to do this thing. No, we have to do all of those things. So we have to do the education. We have to do the economics. We have to do the spiritual aspect. And I think that thinking about how we build on and move forward in terms of for our times, dropping what we no longer need, in terms of what Garvey was thinking about in terms of a conscientious Christian worship, getting back to a conscientious, African-centered, African spiritual systems, right? So transitioning from this idea of Christian worship and maybe transitioning toward this idea of getting into an African spiritual system. What are we grounding ourselves in? Because we know that African spiritual systems were key in all of, and if not in most of, the revolutions that we've done and most of the rebellions that have happened as well, that there was a key spiritual aspect to it. So what are we grounding ourselves in, and how are we creating when we're creating and we're working to build and also fight colonialism? What are we grounding ourselves in spiritually, and how are we making that part of the work that we're doing? And it was also interesting to me, this idea of that they had of civilizing backward tribes in Africa. That was interesting because just this to me, that's a colonial idea that, you know, that was had then, but, you know, we've shifted away from that, and also always checking ourselves to see what colonial ideas are we including in whatever that we're doing to challenge, because we know that the UNIA was challenging colonialism, but still had this piece, at least in the beginning in that manifesto, about civilizing backward tribes in Africa. When you're talking about that, what are you talking about doing? What is, you know, this idea of backward tribes mean? And I think that we have to constantly question ourselves and really make sure that we're not thinking and looking at African people and the ways in which they do things where they're, you know, less touched by European colonialism as things that we must change. You know, that making sure that we're not trying to bring in these Eurocentric lenses and say, okay, well, this is what people in Africa need to do. Well, they have a colonized mind, and so do we. So we have to make sure that in, you know, deciding for solutions, that we're not trying to do things that may be counterproductive and continue like this aspect of colonialism.
Reverend Kimba, let me answer this question quickly. That's a very great question. And then before you can go ahead. So there's a question here. It says, at Frank, why was it that Marco Garvey movement was a failure? I don't know about that, but we'll answer that question. Why was it that Marco Garvey movement was a failure in Jamaica, yet very successful in the United States of America? Why? I mean, what is the state of the Jamaican mind that then and now? Okay, so let me answer that question. So first of all, I will say this to you. I don't think Marco Garvey movement in Jamaica was a failure and then was a success in the United States. How can you classify someone success when he did not live to see the end of what he advocated for? So are you trying to tell me that Dr. King was a failure in the United States? Are you trying to tell me that Malcolm X was a failure in the United States? None of those people live because they were targeted and they were killed and they were assassinated. So in the same way, I will say this to you. It was not a failure. The reason why they targeted him and they put false crime against him and the UNIA went down from that movement, it was because they saw his success. The colonialists will not come after you when it sees that you are failing. That's what we need to understand. So if he was a failure, the colonialists would not have gone after him. But because he was a success, that's why they went after him and they put false crime against him and they took him down. So why would he say he was a failure? He was not a failure. He was a success, and that's why they took him down. And that's why we need to understand, as we are putting pieces together and teaching the next generation, as we are putting pieces together for freedom and liberation, we need to get it straight. If you are a failure in the eyes of the colonialists, why would they come after you? If Dr. King was a failure, they wouldn't have gone after him. If Malcolm X was a failure, they wouldn't have gone after him. If W.E.B. Du Bois, later on, he recognized it and he began to make the right decision, they went after him. If Kwame Nkrumah was a failure, they wouldn't have gone after him. If Thomas Sankara was a failure, they wouldn't have gone after him. So when you tell me Thomas Sankara was a failure or Patrick Lumumba was a failure, all of these people were killed before. So no, they were not a failure. And it is because of that today, Jamaica is even in a problem because they killed him. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think we're going to do a third part of this Garvey Pan-Africanism so we can like really dig deep into it. But just to build on what you were saying in regards to the impact that Garvey had in Jamaica, the Caribbean in general, and other places, I think like he was definitely successful. You can say that Garvey's impact in the Caribbean, Jamaica, the Caribbean overall, may be more visible than you see in a lot of other places. And an example, at least I'm of that opinion, because some of the examples that I could give, and I know that this isn't Jamaica specifically, but in Costa Rica, you have Afro. They just had Afro Indigenous Cultural Heritage Month for the whole month. Which was hard, and the Day of the Black was August 31st. These were institutions were particularly influenced by the Marcus Garvey's movement. In Barbados as well, they're, created institutions in Jamaica to uplift, in the month of August, to uplift Garvey's convention in 1920 of the month of August, from August 1st to August 31st. So the particular month has been considered African or Afro Indigenous Cultural History Month as a result of Garvey's work. So it's like recognition that we are African people. He planted that seed. And also it's African August 31st. Costa Rica went to the UN and fought for August 31st to be African descended, African descended and Heritage Day. Maybe mixing the name up, but recognition of African descended people around the world on August 31st as a result. But all of this it isn't revolutionary, but at the same time, it just shows the impact. If you think about the context of Garvey, that Garvey was living in at that time in Jamaica, he had to travel the world really to like even for himself to be conscious and be conscious of the impact that colonialism was having on African people all over. And so he came to the conclusion of what needed to be done as a result of his experiences in other places, right? And seeing the African condition. So all Jamaicans didn't have that luxury to do what Garvey was doing. They understood the contradiction, though, that there was a contradiction, but Garvey was able to get at the heart of the contradiction and understand that we all are in the same conditions. And so Garvey's message, he planted the seed, and later on, Jamaicans began to adopt Garvey. Not saying all of them, but they began to adopt Garvey. It's the same thing with Kwame Ture in Trinidad. He was ostracized from Trinidad at one point, and then later, he was allowed to come back, and they adopted Kwame Ture. There's not a Trinidadian that I know of who would speak badly of Kwame Ture. So, they planted the seed, and that's one of the things that we have to do. We charge colonialism and are doing, planting the seed of awareness. But Natasha, did you want to add anything?
So
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I know that there was a question in the chat in terms of the conditions and the forces that made the Garvey movement successful. And I know that definitely when we talk about the conditions that existed in America when Garvey did come to America, and where people were deciding that they wanted to join this movement, we know that there were a couple of different things that were going on. We know that at the same time this was going on, there was this whole new Negro movement, kind of like the Harlem Renaissance thing going on. when this was happening. And so that you had this movement of Black people who are already here in America deciding that they were going to reconnect back with their Africanness, and deciding that that they were going to live in a sense as Black people in a way that was proud and powerful, that they can create and control specifically who they are and connect that to their African identity. So you already had this movement going on within America amongst Black people, and there were a lot of other Black people as well at the time who, as we read last week and this week, that Garvey became connected with in terms of people raising their consciousness. So there was already that movement here in America. And also when we think about World War I, this idea of how African people, had gone into war, and now we're seeing, the racism and, the difference in being treated. That happened in after World War II as well, but also the First World War, they came to see that same thing, just how mistreated that they were here in America, and even if they entered the armed forces. And so people had that also, that feeling of really seeing what was going on in their conditions and wanting to do something about that. And so when the Garvey movement came around, it coincided with those conditions that were in existence. And so that really helped for a lot of people to join the organization and really make it what it came to be, because people were looking for things that they were already doing, like that fervor, that kind of spirit of wanting to get back, wanting to connect to Africa, wanting to be like proud of being Black, wanting to create and control your own things was already there. And so I think that when Garvey came in, he came into kind of what was already happening, as we talked about. You had Booker T. Washington that he wanted to meet. So these things were already happening. And so when you talk about America specifically, that gave the conditions for the UNIA to really grow the way that it did. So.
And like Garvey too, like Garvey was speaking about colonialism. If you think about it, I mean, he was race first, and he talked about African people. In this particular section, he said, "Where is our government?" But I think all of that was speaking to the colonial relationship that he was critiquing, because he really didn't. He kind of he said white people basically are doing what they're supposed to do as a white race. They have their government, they have their army, and so forth. Where is ours? And so he was putting the onus on us to build these things. And so, people criticize him sitting down with certain white folks and everything. But he was sitting down as a leader of an African nation, dealing with other nations. And so whether these people were racist or not, and I think that speaks to Garvey wasn't, he wasn't a racist in the sense that, he had this sort of prejudice against other white people, but he understood the economic relationship that needed to be addressed. Black people need their own military. They need their own, government. They need their own, educational institutions, economic institutions. And so when he came to the United States, even though, he was really speaking about colonialism, the racial question, though, like racism was so prevalent and obvious in the United States that more people resonated with Garvey's message. Whereas when you go to the islands, places like Jamaica and so forth, even though they were a colony, Jamaica was a colony, they really couldn't see past the whole, they really couldn't see past the race question. Like there probably was this thing where there wasn't a race problem because they seen Black people in positions of leadership, unlike you would see in places like the United States and so forth in that context. So I think that's why, at least early on in the United States, the message resonated with them a lot faster than in those other places. And again, like Marcus Garvey being able to travel where, others didn't have that luxury, he had that exposure and said, yo, we're doing bad everywhere. What's the common denominator? Did you want to add anything, Frank?
Yeah, I just want to answer this next question. I think the first question you posted, that question was answer based exactly on the question you posted. I'm talking to Atus. And then, but he kind of rephrased the question and brought it back. And I think with this question, Natasha already answered it as to why that movement in the United States, was huge, the UNIA, because there was other, how do you call it, body of organization already at that time here. So when Garvey came, that also helped him, to how do you call it, run the movement, because there was people already. So basically, they just needed that leader up front. And also, Nkima talked about the form of governmental system at that time in Jamaica as well, where black people were there in position of offices as well. And it was a colony at that time too. But you also have to understand that the movement that was in the United States at that time, it was not as compared to, how they call it, the movement that was in Jamaica was not as compared to the movement in the United States. It was more forceful, and most people fighting, because we are talking about people who are fighting to how they call it, to, I think last week we read something about the area Pan-Africanists in how they call it, the United States, and people that was fighting and so forth and things. So you should imagine there was already people on ground who were moving for freedom, unlike as compared to Jamaica that was fourthly a colony. Okay, so now, and you're talking about now, Michael Garvey was there a long time, and you're talking about now. The question now is, we that live in this current time, Jamaican that live in the current time, what are they doing to follow Michael Garvey's footsteps? What are they doing to liberate people in Jamaica? What are they doing? Because now we cannot put now on Michael Garvey. Michael Garvey did at that time what he was doing before he was taken down. But when he was dead, what became of Jamaican people? What did they do to follow his footsteps? What are we doing now as Black people to follow Michael Garvey's footsteps? But Michael Garvey succeeded in Jamaica at that time because he was killed. So we cannot justify it that he didn't succeed. Michael Garvey did not die a natural death. Okay, so how to call it? He did not retire naturally. Okay, they put false crime on him and they put him in jail, and that led to the dismissal of the UNIA. So even as that, we cannot say the UNIA failed, because at the end of the day, the UNIA was subject to failure by the colonizer. The UNIA did not dissolve on its own, because when that happened, I can tell you at that time, they was going after major UNIA leaders. And what did they do? Most of them fled to Africa. Most of them went to Ethiopia. So are you getting it?
Hey, appreciate that, Frank. I'm looking at the comments. I know we're at that time. Let me read this last one though. Let me pull that up. Says we need industry leaders to guide the Pan-African movement, not preachers, teachers, motivational speakers. This won't work in the long term. It's like I agree with it, but at the same time, there's like I don't know if there's some capitalist leanings though. I think we have to watch out when people speak like this, because what are they really saying, and what are they looking for? Because at the same time, I think like these I think we do need teachers and motivational speakers. Some people would say preachers. I'm not much of a church person, but I think all of these people play an important factor in the movement. But when we talk about industry leaders and what we have plenty of those under this system of colonial capitalism. So I think the political education is very important when we're talking about industry and any sort of business. What are we looking to? We need industry leaders for what ends. If it's to continue the relationship under colonial capitalism, then no, we don't need these. But Garvey himself, you can say that he was a preacher, teacher, motivational leader, and at the same time, He was pushing for industry. But his leanings, though, he was looking to several ties with the European. And so I think we need more people like Garvey than anything else. But, I don't know if y'all had any final comments in regards to that.
I just have a final comment, just going back to what we were talking about before, because I know part of the question was, how can we create those same conditions to be able to do the same things or to be successful, in, to recognize that the specific thing was, how can we create similar conditions to recognize them and create another successful movement. I think that one, I will say, like, in terms of like the preachers, teachers kind of thing, as was mentioned before, we need everything. I think that there's this misconception that, only these specific things. The thing about it is that most of the history that we know, even if we're researching it ourselves, it doesn't always show you the full thing. Like, there's so much of what we don't know. And so you never see the full picture of the teachers, the nurses, all these people that were involved in these various movements. So whether they were in Africa, whether they were here in America, whether they were in the Caribbean, these people were important, like in teaching and taking care of, in medicine and all of these things. So we need all of them, but we need them obviously in their right African mind. And in terms of the conditions, that we can't create the conditions that are needed. Like, Marcus Garvey didn't create the conditions of his time. He came into those conditions. And so we are born in this time and we are living in this time. So we have to look at the conditions that exist now and be able to say, okay, within these conditions, where can we go? What can we do to be able to affect the things that we need to? And I think that one of the things that existed during the time of Marcus Garvey's, like we talked about before, was all of these different movements and organizations that were going on, but that they were working with each other. And so I think through the COINTEL of the 1970s, the 1980s, a lot of that distrust and a lot of that severing ties between organizations, because of all of the involvement of COINTELPRO, building distrust amongst Black organizations, has really affected us. So I think that if, in terms of the current times, if we can do one thing that we can do to start with, but one thing within all the things that we're already doing, is work with other organizations, build that trust between other Black organizations, so we can be able to start to tap in and have people join organizations. People don't really a lot of Black people, they don't want to join organizations. And so that's another thing that, we have to get past as well. But we know that, that's a result of the FBI, COINTELPRO, and the meddling in the Black liberation movement.
Yeah, indeed. I think we can revisit this much needed conversation. We're going to do another part of this, Garvey, and I can't find this comment right here. Frank, you put that up there. I think we're going to do a third part of this, Garvey.
Yeah, I just want to read this.
Okay.
I just want to read this. Yeah. So there's a reading from Dennis. He said, we continuously fight to be led by an enemy who has perpetuated rape, our women, kidnaps our babies, murder our youth, perpetuated, and yet we want to be like by them. Are we not fool? So I just want to read that out there. And exactly, that's a very great question. Exactly, what are we still doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to appreciate, though, everybody who is engaged, though, in the chat. Thought-provoking statements and questions that I think we, continuously need to build on as we think about approaches to liberating ourselves. And I think, like, there's different ways to go about it. But Natasha, you had raised the idea of an African mindset. not just an African mindset, but I think like also, you know, there has to be an African mindset and an colonial capitalist mindset as well. And Frank, you had mentioned this earlier in regards to Garvey educating Africans, you know, teachers, like needing teachers to sort of educate, you know, Africans into those who want to repatriate, but sort of like decolonizing them so they're not going back to Africa with the colonial mindset. So when we talk about, you know, I think I unite with your point, Natasha, in regards to what we need: more teachers, plumbers, all of that. Teaching is an industry, you know, preaching is an industry, because I see comments in regards to doctors being in all, you know, all the teaching, all of that is industries. At the end of the day, you know, we need people, we need leaders, we need workers, we need all of these things to create a nation that is a nation led by African people with the objectives of severing or destroying or dismantling colonial capitalism. So, you know, we can continue this next week. Appreciate everybody being a part of this discussion. Make sure you visit our website, wechargecolonialism.org, wechargecolonialism.org. Check out our latest articles. And again, on October 1st, we are going to be transitioning to our previous YouTube channel, We Charge Colonialism. So we'll no longer be airing from We Charge Colonialism TV after October the 1st. Just want to make sure everybody's aware of that and that you subscribe to our other YouTube channel. So until next time, I want to say appreciate you and peace. All right, yeah. And I have to do this outro.